no one has a right, no one has a right to look at you and tell you you're to this, you're to that, you're not this, you're not that. Therefore, you can't do this thing that you love and you're good at. There was a point in time where I ever thought that I had to look, act, or be a man on the field because I kind of come from the Beverly Crusher school of, oh no, it's not me that's wrong, it's the universe that's wrong. Because, like, no, umpiring is not a man's job, it was my job. I think what could have been a major disability in my life, which was being basically locked up as a kid and being isolated and separated from society and all that, but I think it's become somewhat of a superpower for me because I immediately don't care what society says and what culture says.
Today, I'm excited to have Ria Papagiorgio on the show. Ria, why don't you say hi and introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, well, my name is Ria Papagiorgio. Met you through, through the Star Trek circles. And so that's really been the community that I've felt most at home, possibly in my entire life. Maybe aside from some, crazy families. I kind of grew up torn between two cultures. I'm Greek American, so in Greece I was American, in the U.S. I was too Greek. Kind of due to some, let's call it questionable parenting, I grew up pretty isolated, and so get to school, and the thing that I didn't know, I went to school in the U.S., didn't know English well enough, didn't know the language, didn't know all the words all the other kids knew, but also just pretty cut off from culture, pop culture, society. So have always been kind of catch up. Spent, 18 years trying to be American. Ended up, getting into the workforce in the U.S. and just had no idea what American culture was like. Trying to fake it, trying to pretend, and that was much my whole life. In my 30s, began to realize through my 30s that I don't have to pretend anymore, and embracing, the culture of my childhood, basically. And now in my 40s, you know how it is when you get to your 40s, the amount of fucks given just down to zero. I'm battling the outsider syndrome, though. My most recent project myself is trying to figure out how to not be an outsider everywhere I go. I've had a number of interesting careers, I guess you could say. I've had a few interesting careers and a bunch of boring ones, put it that way, throughout my life. And here I am again as a middle-aged woman who's just starting out as a pilot, which has traditionally been for 22-year-old boys, rich white boys. So here I am again, outsider, looking in. So yeah, it's a good time in my life to be kind of working on that particular aspect.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love how you talk about growing up and kind of feeling like you're in two different worlds. And one of those things that forces us to examine who we are, right? It's so because you kind of you can't avoid that question when you feel like you're an outsider. So I wanted to before we dive into your story, I want to ask you, what does living authentically mean to you?
That's a good question. Let's see. Being true to yourself, and then I guess the question is, what is yourself? Because it's a moving target. You're not the same person today as tomorrow. But I think it's important to have values, core beliefs, core values, those constant threads throughout your life, and actually even those change, and those definitely change a lot from two in my life. But through trial and error, I guess you find what you really believe to be true and important and valuable, and really hang on to what's important and true and valuable. So those kind of core values and beliefs. And also for me specifically, and I'm sure for other people too, holding on to my culture. I could give a lot of examples, but just talk food. You know, I don't like American food, and I tried to like cheeseburgers and all that, and they're okay. Actually, I'm at the age where my gallbladder says no to cheeseburgers, but hot dogs, potato salad, that's just stuff that I just don't like. but give me a nice piping hot spanakopita, some lamb on the spit, So um, just as an example of food, not pretending anymore. I don't have to pretend anymore. I don't have to be something that I'm not. Why? To impress somebody? To, try to get in with a group or something? Um, no, give me my spanakopita, feta cheese and olive oil. And again,
I
not
love it.
just for food, but in all acts of
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Mhm.
that's a good analogy, food, because food is a social thing, right? And sometimes we get
Mhm.
pressured to eat what other people are eating, right? And so that can be true of other things that are there's social pressure to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you had talked about living, what does living authentically mean to you, right?
Mhm.
And you brought up tastes and preferences, and food is like an example. What
Mhm.
feels right for you? I want to talk a little bit more about where you are today, right?
Mhm.
Your life has led you to begin this career as a pilot, flight
Mhm.
instructor, and I think there's a bunch of other interesting moments you talked about as well. But like, how did embracing your authenticity, you know, lead you to this moment? Did it lead you to
Yeah.
this moment? If so, how? Yeah.
It was definitely a factor. I had a quote good job, but it was a desk job, and I never belonged there. It was a struggle from the get-go, and I did it for 14 years. And I had a few different positions, within this career, some more exciting than others. The last one, it was a management position, which I enjoyed. I guess taking care of my employees. That was definitely a perk of it. But ultimately, it was still a desk job, and I was in a place. I lived in Nebraska at the time, and you talk about not fitting in. Those people did not want me there. That's definitely a place I found where there was one mold. This is what a person is. This is what a Nebraskan is. And oh my gosh, if you stray from that template in any way, shape, or form, they would surround you to beat you back into it. Like every person I met that was from there, born and raised, was like the same person, and it was just appalling. So anyway, to the point where I was bullied at work, like daily. Not, not like the kind of bullying you think of, in junior high, but I called them the petties at work, and it was all these petty people, sadly
Mm.
mostly women, who were really, really offended that I had a different body type than they did, and just any little cheap shot they could get in, and it was every day. I also got like comments about my skin color all the time, and I'm just like, it's 2010, 2014, 20, whatever year it is. Why are you, why do you have a problem with my skin not being pink like yours? It was just like, anyway. So all of that to say, wasn't thrilled in this environment, and it was never a job that I was suited for. And so for 14 years, I had a part-time airline job. I did airport customer service, kind of, on the side, everything from checking you in at the counter to loading your bags to de-icing the airplane to,
Wow.
working the ramp to working the gate. I loved it. Loved the job. It was minimum wage, but I had awesome flight benefits, but it was minimum wage, so it's not like I could live off of that. So anyway, for 14 years, I was doing that alongside of my desk job, and the whole time I just wanted one job in aviation that paid six figures. It was in front of me the whole time, and I never saw it. It took, a decade and a half. And when it was like I got hit by a bolt of lightning. I'm like, why am I not a pilot? If there's one thing I'm good at in life, it's operating machinery. Why am I not a pilot? This is what I'd been looking for. I don't know, thought maybe the barriers to entry was too high, or I don't know why it didn't occur to me before. So it took about, oh gosh, from the time that the lightning bolt hit me, which was in July of 2021, until I started flight school in September of 2022, July, August. So that's 14 months it took to get all the pieces in place, including selling my house, which was the most terrifying thing of all. My home was really my sanctuary, and moving across country into a crappy little apartment. The rent was twice what my mortgage was. It was insane. Like, the comparative cost of living increased. Nothing for you in California, but anyway, but I had to do it. I was 11 years away from retirement, and at first, like, well, no, do I couldn't even finish the thought because it's like I'm not going to waste the best 11 years of my life doing this.
Hmm.
I had to. I had to. No way I couldn't. There's no way I couldn't have not gone for it. Um, it was such a. I mean, it was a huge risk, but I did the calculations. I guess I did the preparation. It took months and months and months and months. But there's no way, and maybe it is authenticity. I couldn't live with myself. I could. There's no way I could have lived with myself if I
Hmm.
had let the opportunity slip by.
Yeah. Wow. That is just such a powerful. The hairs on my arms are standing
Oh
up.
wow.
Yeah. No, it is just such a daring, amazing story. To think 11 years from retirement, selling your home that you and it's one thing, just saying, okay, I'm going to sell my home and move someplace completely different and all of that. But then, like you said, it was your sanctuary,
Hmm.
and taking this big bet on yourself. And you said that, there was no way you couldn't have, because
Yeah.
you would be betraying yourself, right? If you didn't.
I'd be living with regret every day of my
Mm-hmm.
life, and it's something I could control. And the other thing too that a lot of people don't realize about being a pilot in the US, but I'm sure worldwide too, is how precarious it is. Like it took me 10 months just to get a medical certificate saying I was fit to fly. It shouldn't have taken 10 months. That's another story. But at any point in time, any pilot out there, we lose our medical, we're done. That's the end, period. So any little thing could go wrong. And by a little thing, I mean, it could be cancer or something I don't know about. It could happen to my vision. I could be in a car accident. I could get, sucker punched in a bar and lose sight in a night. Just any little thing and I lose everything. So I'm still kind of a little bit in awe of how precarious my position is, but made it this far, by the grace of God, and I hope again by the grace of God I'll get to continue a lot farther.
Yeah. I think most of us don't realize how, like, I didn't know about the health certificate. I mean, it makes sense, obviously, after you mention
Hmm.
it, right? Because
Yeah.
you don't want to be mid-flight with so many people's lives and have an issue.
Yeah.
But I think what gets missing from the narrative is, like, you see somebody in that cockpit and you don't see all of the grit that went into getting there,
Hmm.
right? And so, like, I think this is the thing I'm curious about for you is
Hmm.
that um, maybe that's one of the more authentic things for you is, like, you know not betraying yourself. And so, going back to being an umpire, right?
Hmm.
Was that a similar story there, or where you just couldn't, you had to do it because it made sense for you, even though the world was telling you no? Or
Yeah, when you put it that way, it was similar. Wind it, 25 years and take away 25 years of wisdom and substitute it with 25 years of naivete and I was dumb enough to go for it basically because I didn't know, the challenges that along the way. Um, when I figured out I wanted to be an umpire, I was probably 17, yeah, I was about 17, and I loved baseball, and it might have started as a way that I could pretend to be American or try American with baseball, but I ended up genuinely loving, not just the sport and the intricacies of the game, but the history and the richness of the stories of teams and the characters, and just kind of the depth. I think it also attracts me to Star Trek too, kind of the depth of the history of the franchise, So similar thing with baseball. And I knew I wasn't going to make it to the big leagues as a player when the option, I guess, or when umpiring was presented to me as a career and, hey, this is how you do it. These are the steps to get there. That's, when I was like, hey, I should do this. I can do this. I will do this. I'm going to do this. And so that was right at the beginning of my senior year of high school, as I recall. And so then graduate high school, go off to college, and I don't care in the least what major I end up with because I'm going to graduate and then I'm going to go to umpire school. And so, did I waste my college years? In a lot of ways, it was, in a lot of ways, yes. But anyway, went through that and then went to umpire school. And um, yes, I knew that, there had only been one woman that lasted more than a couple games before me. And when I say lasted more than a couple games, through no fault of their own, to Bernice Guerra and Christine Wren, who were the first and second women, they just were absolutely, forced out of the game. But Pam Postema spent 13 years in minor league baseball, was repeatedly denied any opportunity to go to the big leagues. She was the last one. Her last year was 1989. My first year was 1999, 10 years later. 10-year gap. And I knew the history, but I didn't know what that would mean for me on a day-to-day basis, which on the field, fine. Coaches, players, umpires, or not umpires, players, managers, coaches, front office, grounds crew, scouts, baseball people, no trouble with whatsoever. Boy umpires were very, very threatened by my existence, which is so ridiculous. But there was a lot of unpleasantness, a lot, for the 9 years that I was in the game. And, looking back, I wouldn't change anything. If I had known as a 22-year-old what I was stepping into, who knows? But this is also what I wanted to do. It was a similar thing to flying when I started umpiring. Um, I started at umpire school. Here I started at flight school. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved it more than I knew I could love it. And then as earned my spot in professional baseball, worked my way up through the minor leagues, and as I got better, I only loved it more and more and more. And as you get, kind of more proficient and more, when you become a master, an expert in your field, um, there's a different kind of love that comes from that. Um, but then just, I love to be outdoors. I love to run around. I love to cuss at people in English and Spanish. I mean, it's just like everything, that I wanted. And it's interesting because I've talked about this with a few people. There are some major similarities between the skill set of a professional baseball umpire and the skill set of a pilot, which who would have thunk? But there really are. And just as an example, landing a plane is like umpiring behind the plate. If there's one thing I loved, it was work behind the plate, where you call hundreds of balls and strikes in a given night. And for each one, it's just this deep meditative moment that chronologically might last 4/10 of a second, but where you step outside of time and time stops and noise ceases and, just, yeah, I'm turning into my dad and I make short stories long, but I loved umpiring. And um, no one has a right, no one has a right to look at you and tell you you're to this, you're to that, you're not this, you're not that. Therefore, you can't do this thing that you love and you're good at. So um, it does make me laugh a little that here again I'm finding myself in the same situation. Now, I will say it's not anywhere remotely as aggressively, openly hostile. I have yet to be beaten up for being a middle-aged woman flying planes, but there's definitely the undertones of who is wanted and who isn't in this profession. Although it is changing. I can definitively say it is changing. But then here I am, 25 years later at the base of a mountain, looking up, climbing. I'm just like, what? Back then I had the energy. What am I doing now? But that's the only way, so I got to keep climbing.
Yeah, wow. There's so much there that I want to dig into. I mean, one thing that you had mentioned before we go into the main thing is that intense moment of focus that you have
Yeah.
behind the plate, and then the same thing happening when you're landing the plane, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you also talked about the things that you loved about earlier about piloting, about the
Hmm.
airlines, and now all the things that you love about, the things back then that you loved about baseball, you probably still do. Um, and what came up for me when you were talking was I was thinking about like a big part of authenticity, right, is connecting with yourself, right? Because you said
Hmm.
like people would say, oh, you know, you have no right to do that. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that. Here's what you
Hmm.
should do. They try to tell you who you are, what you
Yeah.
should be, right?
Hmm.
How you should live your life, what your life is, who you are. And so it's so hard to overcome that external, right? So, how have you connected with yourself
Hmm.
in spite of that? Like, is there
Yeah.
something that you've done that's kept you grounded and kept you connected to yourself and kind
Hmm.
of like kept all those voices out?
Well, like I said, for 14 years, I worked a desk job, and that, what now I wonder what was I thinking? I was looking for the right place to, the right thing to move to, but um, I think what could have been a major disability in my life, which was being basically locked up as a kid and being isolated and separated from society and all that. It could have been a disability, but I think it's become somewhat of a superpower for me because I immediately don't care what society says and what culture says because I reject culture. Actually, more than that, I don't even know. For the most part, I'm pretty ignorant. At first, it was because I didn't have the choice. That the culture wasn't available to me. That society at large, was I was sheltered from that, I guess. But now it's by choice. Like I don't watch the news, and I went through probably 20 years where I did watch the news, probably 30 years. Junior high, high school, I was all into politics, and politics in the 80s was not what politics is now. I was more interested in the, I guess, political science aspect. When it was probably 10 years ago I quit watching the news because it just a big mudslinging. It's like watching WWE but without a plot, without beautiful men in spandex. Why should I care? I don't. Peace out. So same thing with most. People are always telling me, oh, you haven't seen this TV show or movie. You need to watch it. You need to watch it. And I used to have a list, and anymore it's like, yo, if I had a list, it would take me 6,000 years to get through it, and I don't care. So my absence of caring, and also age, like I said before, the field of fucks given becomes barren. So yeah, that has definitely helped me a lot because if some, you know, rich 22-year-old white boy, again, to go back to the stereotype of who's supposed to be in flight school, wants to tell me that I don't belong, then I'll be like, who the hell are you? Go fuck yourself. Um, Pardon my language if this is a PG podcast.
Yeah,
If
no, you're good.
you want the
How
real
can we have a
fucking Rhea,
podcast of
there's a whole bunch of.
authenticity?
Oh
We
my
can have a
gosh, yeah.
podcast. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I had cussing for years too when I got out of baseball. It took work to iron out my vocabulary. Oh my gosh. And then I got to flight school. Actually, I had the first roommate I had was turned out to be a sexual predator, amongst other things, and a stalker and all that. And that's when I started cussing him, mostly just to fuck off, leave me the fuck alone, quit fucking staring at me, quit fucking following me around. What the? So just it was like seriously, I had for all these years cleaned up my vocabulary, and then just floodgates open, and now I don't even try.
Good. I think it was a scientific study done. I'll have to dig this up. So if somebody tries to fact check me, maybe I'm wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But recall there being a study done that people who tend to cuss more frequently tend to also be more honest and trustworthy. So,
I'm honest to all and way too trustworthy. I get taken advantage of way too much. So, yeah, it's fucking horse shit.
well, going back to talking about your childhood and like, okay, so this was such a important point, and I don't want to lose the thread because
Hmm.
it was just so self-aware. And I think for a lot of us, you know, our childhoods are, that's our universe, right? Like the way we were raised, we can't see any other way of being, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, how could you? That's all you knew growing up, right?
Hmm.
And so a lot of times we have this unique childhood, and it gives us superpowers, and it also gives us, you know, trauma and things like that too. But
Yeah.
I think identifying like those superpowers that came out of your unique childhood is so powerful. And for you, it sounds like it was that isolation led you to, you know, not need that external validation as
Hmm.
much, right?
Yeah. That's definitely a part of it. And then another part of it is my mother, we'll call a spade, is a narcissist. And just within the last few years learned about the narcissistic parenting style. And I was like, have you all met my mother? Because this is what you're describing here. And so she needed, for me, she needed to be my entire universe. Well, by the time I was, in fact, I had a specific moment at the age of 10 when I realized that she was an idiot. And that was literally my revelation at the age of 10. My mother's an idiot. She doesn't know anything. Therefore, everything she'd been programming me my entire 10 years of life, I, at the age of 10, started examining everything and just rejecting. So I think, again, that what could have been a disability turned into, became for me a superpower because I became very self-analytical. I mean, I have an analytical personality anyway, but at that young of an age, to kind of be forced to analyze every single thing and kind of pick and choose. Now, the downside was at 10 years of age, I had to start raising myself and didn't have her to turn to. And she made sure that my dad, they're still married to this day, lived in the same house, but she was very threatened by it because I used to be a daddy's girl when I was little. So she put an end to that as soon as she could. So I didn't really have any parental figures at home, but I did find other people to look up to. My grandpa, my mother's dad, actually, absolute hero. My dance teacher took me in like a daughter. So I did have, other influences, but from that early age, began to pick and choose what I wanted to follow, who I wanted to be, what I wanted to be like. And like I said, by my teenage years, I had to prove that I was American. But there were other, and it's funny too, because, as an adult now, I still say one of the privileges of coming from two cultures is I get to pick and choose the best of each. And there's a lot of ways that I'm very American, but 100% when it comes to cuisine, I reject American. Aside from barbecue, barbecue can stay. Love barbecue. Everything else can go. And Greek cuisine, the way the Greeks do okra, 100% wrong. That is like the one cuisine Greeks have 100% wrong. Everything else can stay. So, yeah. Back to
You're
food
making me
we go.
hungry.
I don't like
You're
a
making
Greek
me
girl
hungry.
here.
Back to food. That's something that's authentic about Ria. Ria just loves the food.
Yes, does. Yes, she does. The good
So
food.
I want to continue on this thread about connection because I know we talked a lot about your career. There's other aspects to Ria, right? The way we met is through Star Trek, and I
Mm-hmm.
think like Star Trek is such a big part of both of our lives. I think it's a big part of your life for sure.
Yeah.
I know before I even met you, I would see this woman, you know, because we bump elbows together, right? Rub elbows
Mm-hmm.
together in the Star Trek circles, and there's this woman that I could tell just really just embraced and loved Star Trek so much. And I'm curious, like, how has your kind of connection with yourself and this understanding of yourself, you know, the zero fucks given and the, you know, I'm unraveling the universe because I realized who my mom is, right? And all of these aspects of how you were able to connect and figure out like who you are and like which culture do I belong to? Because I get to choose the parts of the culture and all of that. Like, has that helped you also then like connect with other people like your fellow Trekkies, for example? Because I see you be so social in those circles, like, you know, and I see how good you are at connecting with other people.
It's I love hearing you say that because I always feel like I'm very outside myself looking in. Do I fit in? Do I belong? Does anyone even like me? Is always kind of the thought I have. Like, are they just missing me because I'm here? You know, um, because of my whole life, have I had any genuine friendships, genuine connections? Yes, but they've been few and far between, and really not until I got older. But the Star Trek world, wow, has that opened up the universe to me? Pun appreciated. Um, so it was Star Trek was always there, and it comes from my mom's side. Actress, the Trek stars. We don't know what this is. No, no. You put the funny clothes on. We don't know what the guy with the ears. They know the guy with the ears. That's about it. So, but my mom's dad, my grandpa, big Star Trek fan, and again, he's absolutely my hero. Um, he died in 1997, which was just completely devastating. But was a Star Trek fan, of course. Back then it was TOS, period, end of sentence, end of book. And his kids all love Star Trek. My mom, my aunts, my uncles. So they just were all Star Trek fans. And so it was just something that was always there. Again, TOS. We'd get home from school and TOS would be on. And I remember being maybe junior high age, 12, 14, and discovering the TOS movies, which at the time, the uh, the motion picture had come out, and Star Trek's 2 and 3. Star Trek 4 came out a little bit later, and that might have been the first movie I ever saw in the cinemas. I don't remember if I ever saw it in the cinemas. But yeah, anyway, of course, loved Star Trek 4 because especially when you're younger, it's the one with the whales. And although I hate when people call that, it's the Voyage Home. Cute and it's funny and Spock is hilarious and blah, blah, blah. But I remember watching the motion picture, I say for the first time, but really paying attention for the first time. And when I was little, all I wanted was to be an astronaut. I loved space and I just loved all that stuff. And the whole Voyager reveal, I remember just being so blown away by that. And of course, Star Trek 2 is the pinnacle of Western cinema. Star Trek 3, completely underrated. Fabulous movie. So those were my bread and butter. Those four movies were I absolutely loved. But when TNG first came out, I remember watching it sitting on the floor in the living room with my mom and my sisters and calling up, my aunt afterwards, and we were all just kind of like, okay, whatever. The captain's old. He's not old now, looking back, but so anyway, it was always something that was on in the background. TNG was always there. I didn't even know, going back to me being oblivious to the world, I didn't know that DS9 existed until probably 10 years ago. I only know about Voyager because this guy, a college buddy, invited me over for the premiere. And so I'd seen Voyager, on and off. I never knew Enterprise existed. And then for some reason I want to say around 2016, 2017 or something, for some reason I started looking for a Star Trek podcast. I discovered Mission Log, the Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, where they went through all this series and are still going through all this series episode by episode. And by then it'd been around for a couple of years. And so I had a lot of catch up to do. I started listening to that, and then I did another Star Trek podcast. I don't know. I found something else, and he talked about some kind of Star Trek cruise. I'm like, oh, that sounds cool, whatever. Was looking for more I don't know why. I just wanted some Star Trek podcast. Discovered at the time Trek FM, and heard about this show called Discovery, which had, already had its first season. I'm like, what the heck is this? So now I got to do my research because in Mission Log I'd heard about Deep Space Nine, and I started watching all the Legacy show, beginning to end. And then I hear about this Discovery thing, and so I had to get CBS All Access or whatever. But I'm going to do it, and season 2 is coming out soon, so I'm going to finish season 1 in time for season 2, and blah blah blah. And again, I'm making a short story long. That's tough. So, and discovering some of these other podcasts. There were the Discovery kind of live shows, and then there was Amy Nelson was on a few different shows, and I remember Joe Keegan. And anyway, I remember them talking about this STLV, and I'd never been to a Star Trek convention before. And I remember this was March of 2019, and I was sitting at the hairdresser's waiting for my appointment. She was running a little behind, and I'm like, you know what? I'm looking at tickets. At the time I had flight benefits. I could fly for free. I'm looking at hotel. And I'm like, screw it. I did it. Sitting there waiting. I booked. I bought like, know any better? So I bought like the captain's package or the gold package or something like that, and booked my hotel, my travel. Boom. Sent a message to this podcaster, Amy Nelson, who I had never met. And she was so excited I was coming, and I got my hair cut, and that was March. So April, May, June, July. 5 months later, I went to Vegas all by myself. I had to check this thing out. Amy had, you know, told me to find her, and Joe Keegan was going to from Scotland, said to find him. Okay, well, by the end of the day, I had made friends for life. And so, again, Star Trek, it's a franchise. I love the history. I love the characters. I love some but not all of the storylines. It's just like this rich tapestry, and it's awesome. It's nothing compared to Star Trek fans. Like that's what just really that was my tipping point. Was going to STL was day one at STLV, and being accepted in by this group of people I'd never met before. And it was, a couple days later, I got invited out to dinner with like six of them, and Amy and Joe were amongst them, and a few other people. And I was just like, we're at this restaurant, and I couldn't believe they actually invited me along. Like, I could not believe I was included in this group. It just like blew my mind. I was almost like in tears sitting at a table at this fancy restaurant. Couldn't believe they invited me along. Anyway, so again, over the years, not only has there been open to Star Trek fandom, Star Trek fans, who are just the most wonderful people in the world, but this door's been open to the gay community, which I had never been a part of. I'd never been around. I'd never been, it's just, for me, it was something you'd hear about, gay people out there. Okay, whatever. And, again, me being oblivious to society. Well, as it turned out, that's just kind of the circles Amy ran with, as the circles I ran with. And these are the people I fell in love with. And I didn't, gay, straight, male, female, none of that mattered. These are I have these friends now. Coincidentally, 98% of them are gay men, but it is, again, that wasn't even like the reason, but it just kind of, I realized one day, I'm like, oh, I'm kind of in this circle of gay men, and this is like the one place where I feel at home and welcome and feel like I belong and I feel loved. Like the last cruise that we were just on, gosh, a few weeks ago, which the timing couldn't have been more quick. I had just finished my training 11 hours before I had to leave for the airport. And to spend a week just, for me, I felt like I was in this bubble of love the whole time, just surrounded, just awash. And to the point where I probably knew like half the people on that ship. I knew a lot of people, and I kind of ignored a lot of people, but I was just my group in my bubble, and I didn't want to move. I didn't want to go anywhere. I just wanted to be surrounded by beautiful men in Speedos, and it was, absolutely fabulous. But yeah, I don't know if I can even explain why this is the one community I feel so at home with. That's actually something I'm exploring. Why is it that, well, I can give you a million reasons why I don't like being around hetero men. But why of all the groups, I'm not a gay man, but why is this the group that I feel the most connection with? I have theories, but again, I think I'm exploring. But I have Star Trek to thank for that. I have Amy to thank for that, who, ironically, is also not a gay man. But, yeah.
That is such an amazing story. And I also have Amy to thank for us being together too, right? Meeting each other. And but I wanted to say, like, that story though, is just wow. When I'd asked you the question about how has kind of like connecting with your authentic self like allowed you to connect with others. And like, holy cow, what happened for you is that your, kind of rejection of societal norms, right? And your desire to go to this thing that you love, which is Star Trek, through your life, and then eventually you just kind of said, okay, I'm gonna reach out to these people I've never met before, and go to this conference and meet with them. And that was so authentic to you because, I mean, most people would already know this, that like going to a Star Trek convention is not a mainstream thing, right? It's not what straight Greek American women are expected to be
For
spending their
sure.
time at. Um, and and so you went there, and you stumbled across this community, and you were then kind of open to connecting with them, and you discovered, wow, like these folks resonate with me, right?
Hmm.
And had you not gone down that route, had you tried to play to societal norms, right, you never would have found this
Hmm.
community.
I've wondered a couple times, like, what would my life be today if I didn't go to STLV 2019? What would my life be like today if I didn't, you know, basically, I joke about this, but I kind of think it's true, and I hope it's not offensive to anybody in any way, but I think I'm a gay man on the inside, you know? Um, and I don't even fully know what that means. But I feel, yeah, I've wondered before, like, what would my life be like if it hadn't taken that turn? And I don't sit and wonder about it long. I'm like, ugh, gross, yuck, who cares?
Yeah.
I'm here
Well,
now, and this is where I want to be.
yeah, I mean, there's probably some truth. I mean, if you think about like what is a gay man, there's going to be lots of different types of gay men. But like,
Hmm.
if you think about it, you have somebody who's going to be a little bit maybe, they were raised or identify as something a bit more masculine, right? But they also have some more feminine aspects as well, in the fact that they're, are traditionally feminine. They're attracted
Hmm.
to the same sex, and without stereotyping, there are a lot of things that are a little bit more on the feminine side about gay culture, right? And so, yeah, there's probably that overlap for you if you look at your interests, right? You have a lot of masculine, quote unquote masculine
So-called,
interests,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, maybe there's some truth to that, especially if you just kind of take down the gender barriers, right?
Hmm.
And you just say like, yeah, even though you are, a cisgendered heterosexual woman, you have a lot in common with a lot of gay men, and that's okay. We don't need to put a label on it. We don't need to
Yeah,
put you in a box.
yeah. And that's, I think nowadays everyone's so big on labels, and um, you can take your labels and shove them where the sun don't shine. We're all human beings. But there was something, it was a question I was beginning to explore, and there was someone I had met at STLV 2019 who I didn't see again until STLV this past year, and it was so good to see him, what, 4 years later. But he just had posted something random. He shared something on Facebook. It was within a few months after we'd met, and you know, like really, already starting to wonder. I'm like, why is this the community that I so resonate with? And he posted something about, I don't remember exactly what it was, but about basically gay men, especially I know it's different for this generation, but for of our age, having to grow up hiding who they are, pretending to be something they're not, and that kind of thing. And it smacked me in the head like, oh my gosh, that's me. That was my whole life. At home I had to pretend to be something. At school I had to pretend to be something else. Like this whole life of hiding my authentic self, and being told it was wrong, and knowing how much trouble I'd be in if anyone found out, and just having to pretend to be something else. In baseball I had to be so just asexual, and not at there was a point in time where I ever thought that I had to look, act, or be a man on the field, because I kind of come from the Beverly Crusher school of, oh no, it's not me that's wrong, it's the universe that's wrong. Because, like, no, umpiring is not a man's job. It was my job. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, it's a woman's job, and it's unfortunate that we're so male infested right now, but we're working on that. Um, but still, perception, like what I wore to the ballpark, not that I ever want, it's not my desire to be sexy and provocative or anything. Anyway, if I get, maybe I'm a heterosexual woman. I prefer non-practicing hetero because gross. But but just having to be so aware at all times that I had to look, act, and be a certain way. And that was just in one part of my life. Then by the time when I was, working in Nebraska, surrounded by the petties, it's just like, okay, you know, if I, unless I want a ton of abuse, I have to conform to their standard. But I chose the abuse, I guess, because at that point, no, I'm not gonna conform, not to that standard. Ugh.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think there's a lot. There's kind of the surface, obvious. Yes, I love sitting by the pool, day drinking, and ogling various beautiful men together with my gay male friends. But I think there are things that go a lot deeper, um,
Hmm.
which is why I resonate. I think we've had a lot of the same traumas, maybe in different ways, um, or different traumas in the same ways. I don't know, but I think there's a much deeper connection that I'm still exploring. So any insight anyone has, I'm all ears.
That's so exciting. I'm like really excited for you to continue to explore it, and we'll talk about this more in a bit, but I think like that's just that continuum of self discovery and
Hmm.
transformation is that it's just never ending. And
Hmm.
like a big piece of this, I always tell people that you cannot become the person you want to be unless you accept who you are, right? And you
Hmm.
know, and so, but then that's one thing I've noticed about you, right? Is that you you seem very adept at like self acceptance. And I'm curious, where does that come from? Like for you, because I think everybody has their own inner monologue, and I think a lot of us we have this inner critic that's telling us, you should give a fuck, and you shouldn't be this way, and what's wrong with you, and why are you this, and why are you that, and like and I'm sure you have some of that too, but there's probably some other inner monologue that's saying no. It's like be kind to yourself, and this is okay, and this is you. What is that like for you?
Hmm. I've wondered that too, because I was just shocked at how the negative self-talk people have, and how people have such low self-esteem and people self-defeating behaviors. I can't even comprehend why people do that. And honestly, whatever, like, I think my mother broke it, put it that way. I've said that before about feeling guilty. I think my mother broke that ability in me at a young age, because not intentionally, because she was all trying to make me feel guilty. And we're not, but she was Roman Catholic, and I'm very, you know, quick to point out that that is not how the rest of us are in my family. That's a whole other story. But she grew up with guilt and shame just ingrained in her, or that's her, how she practices her faith, I guess, is with so much guilt and shame, and always trying to guilt me and shame me and all this stuff growing up. And it just like say she broke my ability to be guilty, which is a great thing. And so trying to get back to the get back to your question here. So I think a similar thing, you know, trying to make me feel bad about myself or whatever. And it's like, no, not going to have. I don't know if there's like if it's rebellion on my part that started at a very young age, but no, you're not going to manipulate me into hating myself because I didn't do XYZ that you wanted me to do or whatever it is. Um, so part of that, I guess, superpower of just being isolated and deciding for myself, what I wanted to do, be, or think. Like, um, I do find too, I guess, kind of a negative of that. I can be very task oriented when I'm just at home in my daily routine and I have so much to do. And like I have a roommate right now, and I feel bad for him sometimes because he's so lonely, and I never spend any time with him because I've always got something to do, somewhere to be, and not studying and whatever. Then I'm going to the gym, and so because I know what I want to be myself, and I know what it takes to get there, and I know that it takes time. And then when I'm not doing that, I'm doing laundry, cooking, eating, or sleeping. So doesn't leave much time for sitting around making small talk with my roommate. So I guess it makes me a bad roommate if you're social and you want that kind of thing. Um, but yeah, I guess maybe I'm overly practical because negative
Mm-hmm.
self-talk and self-sabotaging behaviors are not going to get you where you need to go. So, uh, got no need for that. It's kind of how I feel about pets too. Nothing. get no value out of them, why would I have the mouse? That's just more work to do. So if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I love that. You know, I think it's a gift you have that maybe you might take for granted, but please don't, because you know so many people struggle with that, and it's I think that message you have to tell people not to do that is it's powerful because it's what's allowed you to you know chase your authentic goals and dreams, right?
And I'm glad you said that because I'm about potentially starting tomorrow having students as a flight instructor. And most of them are going to be half my age and younger. And so, how do I instill in them, um, and especially the girls, because girls are taught to hate themselves in this society. Um, yeah, how do I instill in them how do I teach them to eliminate the negative self-talk,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing? So that's something I'm going to be definitely exploring a lot in the next few months as a flight instructor.
That's amazing. Like, just think about how many lives you might save just by because could you imagine you're in the cockpit, right? Everything starts to go to shit, and then that's not the place where you want the negative self talk to take over, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for any flight instructor, we have just an awesome responsibility to
Hmm.
mold this next generation of pilots. But even at any given moment, I'm in there with a brand new student that doesn't know how to fly this plane that's out here trying to kill us both. And like, I've got two lives in my hands, plus any lives on the ground, plus any other lives in the air. It's an awesome responsibility. And then having that responsibility of developing the whole pilot, not just someone who can fly the aircraft, but especially since most of them are so young, and especially since I'm so much older, I have that responsibility. Any flight instructor is a mentor, but I've got that responsibility even more so because I've got the years and the life experience and that kind of thing. Um, yeah, I'll have these delicate little lives in my hands that I'll have this opportunity to mold, and I'm just hope I don't screw anybody up. Whew, it's a little heavy. I might need another
It
cruise.
is. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think they're so fortunate to have somebody with your lived experience that's going to provide them a unique perspective and a way to approach things. Uh, yeah, I definitely feel more safe already about flying in
Well,
the future.
yay.
So thank you. Yeah.
I mean, when I interviewed
um,
for the job, I told him y'all would be crazy not to hire me.
yeah.
But
I love it. I agree. So I think one thing you had mentioned was about there's all these things in your life, and you have to, like, you can't always have time to make small talk with your roommate, or
mhm.
you also mentioned like pets, and like you're like, I don't have time for that or whatever. And I think it kind of takes me to another topic, which is rejection. And I think like rejection is super important when
Mhm.
it comes to living your authentic self, right? Because you have to reject, like we talked about, rejecting social norms,
Mhm.
and and you also have to be willing to be rejected as well, right? Have there been moments for Ria where Ria's faced some rejection, and where maybe it hurt in that moment, but you're glad that it happened because now here you are.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. I mean, rejection has been another, constant companion, I should say, in my life. And, good and bad, of course. There's always like, the first boyfriend that dumps you over the phone after you've been together for 3 years or whatever, and you're just devastated. Um, there's, you know, there's also perceived rejection, whether it's real or not. That's been a constant. Like I said earlier, when I'm with even our group, I'm still struggling to feel confident that people actually like me. That it's not just I'm Amy's friend, or she's just there on the lounge next to me. Might as well be nice to her. So there's still a lot of that, and there was a even on the last cruise, there was a group picture where I was coming. I was like going to be there in a minute, and then everyone took the picture without me, and I just like it's still I have to kind of fight the hurt when I see that picture that I'm not in because I'm like I was right there, you know. So, and I have to understand it wasn't that everyone's trying to reject me, but I've been through it so much, that personal rejection. Now, as I've gotten older, I know that um, there's a lot of rejection that I get on a regular basis that I'm like, yeah, I'm doing something right. Because when you're not what people want you to be, when you don't fit their mold, their expectations, then they reject you, and that that's the rejection I'm proud of, where it's just like, well, you know, just because I'm not this whatever, well, I don't want to be that, so you can take your expectations and suck it. I don't care. Um, so it's kind of the tables have kind of turned on that in a lot of ways. Close, intimate friendships. Again, I'm still I'm really working on not being so distrustful of them. Here I am. I'm like I said earlier, trustful to a fault. But when it comes to someone actually loving me, it's kind of like, wait a minute, what do you want? And I think that just goes, you know, being ingrained in childhood where it was all transactional. Um, you know, the only time my mother would show any affection is if you did exactly what she wanted when she wanted, and it was only for show in front of other people. And I rejected that at a young age. Um, that's not what I want. I don't want that transactional, you know, tit for tat bullshit. Um, so still kind of struggling with that a lot. Um, you know, finally, I think finally, just recently, I'm able to trust a little better. I have a good friend who actually I've known from, you know, 20 some odd years outside of Star Trek. Um, that I'm we've really our friendship has really blossomed just probably in the last year or so. Um, and it's a result of me finally being able to not be so skittish, you know, if I don't know, just I guess that's the negative self-talk I have is being so convinced that he wants something from me or you know any friend or they just want something from me, they're just using me for this, they're just and if I do something wrong then boom, I'm out the door. So that's a tough one that I think just now really starting to make any kind of headway on. So yeah, rejection. And even the fact that I'm here as a pilot, I was told I was told, quote, you'll never be allowed to fly. That was this doctor in Lincoln, Nebraska, who was convinced that I was having seizures and blackouts every day. I told him, no, I'm not. And he said, are you sure? I mean, mansplaining at its finest. So, long story short, that had held up my medical. I thought I'd never be allowed to fly. I had actually applied for a couple flight attendant positions with a major airline, and I got an interview at the headquarters for this major airline flight attendant position. They said there was like 80,000 applications. 240 of us got interviews. So I talked to a friend of mine who's a purser with this major airline, and he said, "Oh yeah, if they're interviewing you in person, you're in. You just, you know, basically just need to not screw it up." Well, I fly down there. I thought I had a good interview, and actually, funny story that was on a Monday. Friday, Saturday, Sunday was Star Trek Chicago. It was what 2022, and so I'm waiting there. I'm at the con, having a great time with my friends, but knowing that any day I'll get an email telling me that I got the job and we can celebrate. I'm standing in line for the bathroom. I get an email saying that I did not get the job. So that was I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. Apparently I screwed something up. I've got no way to know what, because in the email it says don't ask us for feedback. So yeah, that was a huge rejection, but had I gotten that job, you know, I'd have sold my house 6 months earlier or however much earlier. I'd have quit my job that much earlier. I'd be in whatever town, you know, broke in flight attendant training and all that. And who knows if I would even have been able to come out here and go to school. So, excuse me, that was a rejection, working in my favor, unbeknownst to me at the time. But and let's be
Yeah.
honest, I didn't want to be a flight attendant. I did. I think I would enjoy it, but I really wanted to be a pilot. So glad it happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you favor, um, and I think
Yeah.
there's so much truth to that, right? It's like, why would you want to do something? Why would you want a job where, one side of the party doesn't feel that you're a good fit for it? Like, why would you want to do that anyways, right? So,
Hmm.
but then when you go to do the pilot thing, suddenly it's all coming into place for you, right? And so that's so awesome.
Yeah.
What I loved about what you were sharing was just your vulnerability about, yeah, you know, Ria doesn't give two fucks about what people think, except in these situations, right? In these
Hmm.
social situations. And that's sort of like the next frontier, the new frontier
Yeah.
for Ria, right? I think, and so I'm assuming that. I mean, like, do you think that is like the next thing for you to work on, as you kind of evolve who you are to become more authentic? Because I'm assuming that in those moments when you're like worried about, oh, do they really like me, or do they want, am I here, that sort of thing. Do you find it's hard to show up as your authentic self because of those doubts?
It tends to cause me to retract, I guess, to shrink, to
Mm-hmm.
retract, to stop talking, to say nothing, to kind of be invisible. I think part of that is because I'm afraid of saying, doing the wrong thing. And then maybe there's a grain of, if they don't see me, they can't kick me out. So, yeah, it's funny because you've been asking me these questions that are really getting me to think and to think about stuff in ways that I haven't before. And so it's so easy for me to say, give a big F you to society, um, to the machine, to the man, to the groups of people, to outsiders or whatever, because it's like, I don't want you. I don't care if you want me. Your opinion means nothing to me. Fuck off. I enjoy that. But it's a different matter, and I hadn't thought about it like this before until you just asked me. But it's a different story when it's individuals, um, people that I love, people that I want to. Maybe that's the difference. People that I want to want me. And again, disclaimer, because it's 21st century America. When I say I want to want me, I do not mean sexually, but I'm talking about love and friendship and acceptance. That unicorn I've been chasing my whole life of acceptance. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot different. I think I find with myself as a whole, and maybe it's true with other people. I don't know. You tell me what you think, but you get to know someone one on one, and it's really easy to love people when you get to know them one on one versus to look at someone and be like, oh, that's just you know, slap a label on him. That's just a white male. That's just that's a Muslim man. That's whatever. I mean, fill in your stereotype or whatever. And it's so easy. So that's just a MAGA, you know, Trump supporter, and to hate on that person for whatever the stereotype or group that they belong to. Oh, that's just some, gay fairy, And I think people do that so easily. But getting to know people one on one, um, you know, when it's a lot more difficult and it should be a lot more difficult. It better be a lot more difficult. And I think, and now I'm going way off on a tangent. This polarized society that we're in, it's all about sticking people in boxes and hurling insults at them instead of engaging in one-on-one dialogue. And that goes for both sides. It is a okay, not okay. That doesn't make sense. It is not okay to hate on someone, to hate a person wearing a MAGA hat. And that might be a controversial thing to say. That's still a human being. Um, and we don't get anywhere by hating that person. We get somewhere by establishing a relationship with that person and having one-on-one dialogue. And, who knows where I would be if it weren't for STLV 2019. Um, I lived in a world that now it blows my mind to know that I lived 40 years, however long, in a world, 40 plus years, where I wasn't around gay people, or if I were, they were closeted. And that, think of how many people out there live in that world. And I wasn't someone that was like, at least in my adult life, I wasn't someone who was born and raised, lived my whole life in the same place, never got out much. I traveled the world, and I still was isolated from this massive community. So how many people out there also isolated from the gay community, don't know anything about us? And yeah, I say us because don't kick me up. And all it takes is dialogue, and then just like what happened for me, my world opened up. These doors were open. The floodgates of love opened. Um, I don't know. So going off on a little tangent there. What was the question? I already forgot.
Yeah, well, we're just talking about like how does like the next steps for you. And actually, let's forget about the question though, because there was something that you had said there that I wanted to talk about. Like, I agree with you about that one-on-one dialogue, and actually, that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast. Is that what happens is when you get beyond the label, right, and you get to the person underneath, you start to see that shared humanity
Yeah.
that we all have, right? And I think through the story you shared, I think a lot of people are going to see that even though they're not, Greek American, cisgendered, heterosexual woman who's a, a flight school trainer, pilot, etc. Like they're going to see a lot of themselves, and they're going to see a lot of the same struggles. And when you talk about approaching people who may have completely different views, and maybe their views are against you, maybe their views are views that are meant to, and their actions are hurting you, you can choose to approach them with fear, or you can choose to approach them with love, right? And you're talking about approaching people with love, right? And so I guess what I'm alluding to is that maybe that's the next step for you, is to think about that, where in these interactions where you kind of withdraw and you're kind of disengaging because you're worried about that acceptance, is there an opportunity to maybe go more from a place of love and less of a place of fear? More beyond just, hey, I'll talk to somebody who their label means, oh, I might be afraid to talk to them, but
Yeah.
more about less afraid of what they might think of you.
Yeah. No, it's. I guess I'm seeing two different from the same question. I've got two completely different answers, and one of them is, oh gosh, yeah, I've been a hypocrite because when those pesky hetero white males try to bother me at the gym, I'm just mean to them. Leave me alone. Let me lift my weights. Um, Now, when it comes to that, what I'm really striving to improve, working on, um, is the intimate relationships, not just some yo-yo at the gym that I'll, God willing, never see again. I shouldn't put it that way. That's how I feel. But developing those intimate relationships, because that's where there's the fear of rejection. That's where, do I really belong? I mean, we're becoming, our group, kind of like on the cruise, we're becoming a closer knit group, which I love so much. There's always this fear that I'm going to get booted out, and it shouldn't be there. And like I said, on this last cruise, for the most part, for the majority of this cruise, I just felt like I was drowning in a sea of love. And on my part, I was making a concerted effort to talk to people one on one. You and I talked one on one, and it was the first time we'd really gotten to know each other, which made it even cooler finding that picture of us from like a year and a half ago at the Picard premiere. Um, but that was just like, I was finding that the one-on-one time I was spending with people, I was just falling in love with them even more. And then our group time together, and all the banter and all the silliness and all the glorious costumes. Oh my gosh. Um, I was just, again, I was just falling in love with everyone more and more and more and trying to focus on that and not, you know, we have a word in Greek, pirasmi, or logismi is a similar word, but pirasmi are the thoughts that come out of nowhere and just and bother at you.
Mhm.
And the image is
How do you say
not
that again?
pirasmi,
Pitolisme. Okay.
like pirasmi. Um, Here's the village girl coming at me. So picture a donkey on a hot summer day, and there's flies everywhere. And one fly can't kill a donkey, but a swarm of them that never ever go away can kill a donkey. And picture the donkey's tail swatting these flies away. So that the flies are the pirasmi, they're the thoughts that pop in, and have to swat them aside, you know, and focus on. I mean, if you have a wound, then those flies can gather around that wound and they can really do some damage. All right, protect that wound, swat the flies away. But so I was really making a concerted effort, and I have been for the last at least few months, couple years. I don't know how long. Time has no meaning when you're in flight school. Trust me. Um, to swat those flies away, to ignore them, to not give them any strength, to not feed the flies, to not invite them back. Um, but there's a lot of them, and it's a struggle. Uh, but that's, I think, being more secure in close friendships, which is, like I said, something I never had growing up, and so it's new. But then I've also got all the baggage of the negative. That's, like I said, where I have the negative self-talk. But that is 100% like what my priority um, is developing closer friendships. And shoot, even learning how to do it is tough. Like, I don't like text messaging and all that stuff. Just call me, you know. Um, Working on it, working on it. Yeah.
I love that analogy of the pure as me, right? Is that like that? It's that negative self talk can be that pure as me, right? And
Hmm.
and I think there probably is something there. That's probably a whole other episode. It's just digging into like where in your childhood did this come from? This fear of losing these intimate relationships. But I think that kind of like takes me to the last question I wanted to ask you, and this is about your childhood, right? Which is about like if you could go back um, to your younger self
Hmm.
and give yourself one piece of advice to help you on your journey,
Oh,
like what would that be?
oh wow. Oh wow. How young are we talking?
Let's say you talked about 10 years old was that pivotal moment for you.
Hmm.
What if you could go back to then?
Hmm. Wow. It's funny because there's so much damage that had already been done by 10. Um, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. I don't know who did it. I'm sure it was my mother. But when I want to say about 5, somewhere in that range, 5 or 6, I quit speaking Greek. That was my native
Mm.
language. And I quit speaking it and I refused. And that was, again, much to my parents' chagrin because I was supposed to be their trunky performing on command. And by the time I was 10, like I would love to tell little Ria to um, start speaking Greek again, but I don't know if she could have. I don't think she could have. I would love to tell her to get to know her, get to know my dad, which my dad's still
Mm.
alive, thank God. But my mother was so destructive. It blows my mind that she could do this. We lived in the same house. I wasn't allowed to speak to my dad, have anything to do with my dad. We lived in the same house. That's how petty and jealous and destructive that this woman, she has a life. history of destroying other people's relationships. And it wasn't until, I mean, it was 20 years before I was able to reestablish a relationship. My dad always wanted a relationship, you know,
Mm.
but um, that's just how evil she was. So going back to 10-year-old me, I would love to have get those years back with my dad.
That's beautiful. You still talk to him?
Oh yeah, yeah. He's really it's funny. Like the two people that my mother had like poisoned our relationships in my family are the two people I probably talk to the most in my family, which is my dad and my little sister. She's 18 years younger than me. And in both situations, we were close, and she was threatened by that, and so she, with me and my dad, I was a daddy's girl, so she went after me and made sure I hated him. And then with my sister, 18 years apart, and she and I were two peas in a pot. My mother was jealous, so she went after my sister and made her hate me. My sister hated my guts for most of her life. She'll be 30 this year, and it's really been like the last year and a half, maybe, if even that long, maybe a couple of years that we've had any kind of relationship. Those are the only two that'll text me, say how you doing, you know. The rest of them just I provide no value, so why waste their time? But yeah, I just talked to my dad a few days ago, and yeah, text my
That's
sister every
awesome.
now and then. So
That's
yeah,
that's awesome. Family is so important. I want
yeah.
to thank you so much for
Mm.
sharing your story today. I really loved your perspective on. I think we went from everything from like, you know, rejecting these societal norms about living in two worlds, right, and choosing from, Greek or American, and
Mm.
talked about food, right,
Always.
and talked about not giving two f's about what people think, and chasing your dreams,
Hmm.
whether it was an umpire or a pilot, and we didn't even talk about some of the other pivots that you had as well.
Yeah,
But it's like this constant journey, right? Of
absolutely.
and so like in that sense, what do you think is next for you?
Hmm. Well, a couple of things. Um, I mean, this next year flight instructing is going to be pretty rough. But once I get a big girl job, and I'm not going to wait until I get a big girl job, but I need to I need to give back. I'm at the age where I actually have value to give back, and I've been really fortunate to be here in the Phoenix area because in baseball we're having I mean, I used to have this dream for being 20 years that I would go to a baseball game and all the umpires would be women. And last year we had 5 women. This year we have 9 in professional baseball, in the minor leagues. And this year there's a woman who's in AAA who's going to get called at some point to the major leagues. And it's um, for me, it's a dream come true. And so I have the opportunity now to see these women. Like I make it a point to see them when they're in town, to see them work, to support them, to be there for them. So that's one way that I want to give back. And the time is now. Um, so super exciting time for that. And also in the pilot community, um, I know that I'll have opportunities. Actually, where I really feel called in the pilot community is we've got just overwhelmingly, historically, pilots in the United States have been upper class, white, hetero males. And I want to make the flight deck fabulous again. Um, my motto there. So we have a pilot shortage. We've got this massive pool of untapped talent. Um, but especially for my particular, where my heart is yes, girls, but also middle-aged women, and also the LGBTQ community, big time. We belong in the flight deck. We should be flying the planes. There's no reason why we can't. There's no reason why we shouldn't, and there's absolutely no reason that anyone should tell us otherwise. So where my heart lies in the pilot community, and how exactly I'm going to go about that, I don't know just yet. Um, but yeah, so that's developing intimate relationships, nourishing and cultivating them, and giving back. That's the direction I'm headed from an airplane.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, give especially the part about giving back, like taking what you've done for Ria and giving that for everybody else, right? And it's not just going to create more opportunities for marginalized communities that you talked about, but it's also going to benefit society because there's
Hmm.
so much untapped talent.
Yeah.
So that's so huge and so powerful. So I'm so glad that you're going to do that next, and I'm super excited for you.
Me too. I sure appreciate it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Thank you, everyone, for joining Ria Papagiorgio and myself, Lex Rosales, on Transformational Journeys. And we'll see you next time. Bye.